we're going to keep on in the book of Judges, actually. If you remember, we finished off with the book of Samson, and I said that was basically it. That was the last of the good judges. After that, it's all downhill, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with the book of Judges, but it gets really weird really quickly. In fact, here's the transition from chapter 16 to chapter 17. Right? It talks about Samson, how he died. It says, then his brothers and his father and his whole family went down to get him. They brought him back and buried him between Zorah and Eshtal in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He had led Israel for 20 years. And then a real hard transition into, now a man named Micah from the hill country of Ephraim. And Ephraim, so this is 17 verse 1. And Ephraim, you'll notice in the book of Judges, I think of all the books of the Bible, Ephraim really shows up in the book of Judges, doesn't it? There seems to be something special about what's going on in that area, especially this hill country. And it's probably because of the mountains that are in the area that kind of allow for some of these things to happen. And it says, he said to his mother, now, this is the strangest story, okay? Micah from the hill country of Ephraim said to his mother, the 1,100 shekels of silver, right? That's a lot of money, that was taken from you, and about which I heard you utter a curse. I have that silver with me. I took it. Okay, so he stole his mom's money. Not a great start, but what's even stranger to me is the response. And his mother said, the Lord bless you, my son. Okay, if that doesn't set the tone for the kind of story we're about to see, what kind of mother has a child steal from them and then bless them for returning that which they have stolen, even though it seems like the child kind of came back and gloated about it? Like, this is a strange story. But anyway, so he stole it. She blesses him. In verse 3, when he returned the 1,100 shekels, remember, 1,100, this is important, 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother, she said, I solemnly consecrate my silver to who? To the Lord. Oh, okay, this is a good story, right? For my son to, make an image overlaid with silver. Wait a minute, and I will give it back to you. Wait a minute, we've read somewhere before. This doesn't seem quite right, does it? And in fact, if we look at Exodus chapter 20, verses 4 to 6, this is, of course, the second commandment, where it says, you shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above or on earth beneath or on the waters below, and you shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commands. This is clearly a violation of this commandment. And yet, for some reason, it's just like Aaron and the golden calf, right? Aaron, he immediately decides, hey, I know how I want to honor God by making an idol. It's such a strange, I don't understand why, as humans, we tend to do this, but we do this all the time. We say, I want to honor the Lord, and then for whatever reason, we end up creating for ourselves some sort of image that we worship, instead of just worshiping God for who he is. Anyway, so he makes this image, and he overlays it with silver. It says, after he returned with the silver to his mother, she took 200 shekels. Interesting. Didn't she commit all 1,100 shekels to the Lord? Isn't that what she said? And yet, what does she do? She only gives two. So she's already not a person of her word. This whole story is just off the rails already. So there's only 200 shekels of silver that she gave to the silversmith to use to make the idol and put it in Micah's house. For those of you who are interested, that is only 18% of what she committed. She actually gave to the Lord. And of course, if there was any confusion over make an image, right here the Bible very clearly tells us it was used to make an idol. This was exactly the opposite thing that God had called them to do. And they really have no excuse, right? We're not talking about, this is thousands of years after the time of Moses, right? This is like a few generations later. This is not that long. And yet they have already forgotten. Verse 5, now this man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod. and some household gods. Interesting. We read about an ephod before. There was another judge where the ephod was actually his downfall. And who was that? It was, of course, Gideon back in chapter 8, verse 27, Judges 8:27, where he made the golden ephod. And why was that such a big deal? Because it was used as an image that was meant to kind of represent what the high priest wore. Except for God specifically chose certain people to be the high priest. And it was not these people that they keep installing. In fact, it says that Micah had a shrine, he had the ephod, he had some household gods, and he installed one of his sons as his priest. Once again, violating the rule of God. And it says, in these days Israel had no king, and everyone did as they saw fit. And we can see why, of course, this didn't actually work. If you remember, in these days, the whole point was that you basically followed the high priest. The high priest was essentially the leader of the nation, because the idea was what was the Ark of the Covenant, but it was a throne for God, and it was God who was supposed to be their king. They were supposed to submit to him, follow his rules, follow his leadings, and yet for whatever reason, they kept violating that over and over again. As it says, they did instead as they saw fit. And then a young Levite, and if you remember, the Levites are a special tribe in the group of Israelites, because they're actually a tribe that didn't have any land, because their whole existence was meant to be that of service to the Lord, and as a result, they were taken care of by each of the other tribes. So in turn, they lived everywhere, but they also were not restrained to one particular area. So to hear about this young Levite wandering through this area is not that uncommon. But he had come from Bethlehem in Judah, and he had been living within the clan of Judah, and he left that town, obviously north, because he headed up to the hill country of Ephraim, and he was in search of some other place to stay. And on his way, he came to Micah's house in the hill country of Ephraim. And Micah asked him, "Where are you from?" And he said, "I'm a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah." And he said, "I'm looking for a place to stay." Then Micah said to him, "Live with me and be my father and priest, and I'll give you 10 shekels of silver a year, your clothes and your food." And so the Levite agreed to live with him, and the young man became like one of his sons to him. So then Micah installed the Levite, and the young man became his priest, and they lived in his house. And Micah said, "Now I know that the Lord will be good to me, since the Levite has become my priest." So that's the story of Micah and his idol. Micah, for whatever reason, thinks it's a good idea to violate the will of God, violate the very God that apparently he's choosing to serve, and then he sets up his own priesthood amidst all of this in the hill country of Ephraim, because for whatever reason, we're not actually told why he decides to do it. But what I think it does serve, especially here on New Year's Day, it serves as a great reminder that sometimes when things start going right in our lives, we tend to say, as he did in this story, "Wow, things are going right. I must be in the will of God. God must be looking out for me. God's doing all these great things for me," when sometimes God just allows things to happen. Right? You can be within the will of God and things start going badly for you, because that's not the point. The point isn't about what's happening in this life. The point is what's going to happen in the after. And unfortunately, many times it's very easy for us to also fall into this trap where we go, "Now I know the Lord must be good to me because these things are happening in my life and these things are going well," except for if he would have actually sat down and read the law and been familiar with the Torah and understood what was going on in his life, he would have understood that he was actually acting against the will of God. He was actually outside of the will of God. He was outside of what God had designed this nation to be, and he was instead, as the book of Exodus says, creating a situation where he will be cut off from the rest of his people. And as we read there in Exodus 20, verse 4 to 6, the punishment from the Lord will go down on the generations following after him because of his violation. See, here we are. We're like I said, it's New Year's Day. We're thinking about all the things that we want to do in the new year, and we're looking forward, and we have all these ideas. But I wonder, have we ever taken a time to stop and pause and ponder and think, is this what God wants me to do, or am I still within God's designs? Because guess what? There's one of the things that I love about God is that God isn't so limiting as to say, no. There's only this one thing that you can do. He says, no, look. As long as you're doing these things, right? And this is of course is taught to us later on in the Bible, where the Apostle Paul comes and he tells us, hey, look, we've misunderstood a lot of these things. We didn't understand the salvation that Jesus brought and set us free from. And Jesus set us free from the law because we understood that we couldn't actually live perfectly. We couldn't actually do these things. But instead, now we no longer are bound by the systems that were set up back in Exodus. And now instead we get to live free and in joy and in peace and in mercy and in grace. This should be an amazing, number one, story of be careful how you're living your life, but also should give you a real appreciation for the grace of God that exists for us here today. That God does provide so much, such an abundance of grace, that no matter where even someone as corrupt as Micah in this situation can find redemption. That is such a good, that's such good news. There's a reason why we call it the gospel. There's a reason why we refer to it as the good news, and it's because no matter who you are, no matter where you've been, you have the opportunity to redeem yourself and come forward and walk in the light of Jesus Christ. As we continue to move on through the book of Judges, we're going to see even more of this kind of behavior. As I said, Samson was the last good thing that happened in the book, and the rest is just a cautionary tale of things not to do. That's one of the things that I like. I'm sure you've heard people refer to the Bible as a rule book, but I think as much as it tells you what to do, it also gives you a lot of don't do these, because this is what's going to happen to you. And we see that here with Micah, and we're going to see what ends up becoming of the nation of Israel as a result of the behavior of men like Micah, of men like the Danites that come after this, and the Benjamites that come after this, and it really should, just push us back to this same idea that I've said before, and I want to say it again because I think it's so important. Do we include God? Do we know our Bible enough to make an informed decision and understand, wait a minute, I'm actually out of line right here? Because if you ever find yourself wondering, am I in the will of God or am I not, the good news is that we do have a very reliable resource to fall back on and say, you know what, what does the Bible have to say about this? Because God doesn't hide the truth from us. He brings the truth to us, and he wants us to live in the truth.